You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, oil, gas and coal developments need to stop immediately if the world is to reach net zero by 2050, according to the International Energy Agency. 6 months on from the government's plan for a green industrial revolution, we hear what progress has been made in an exclusive interview with the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. And everyone's talking about peat. We hear why it's so important in tackling climate change. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those coming up with the solutions. Because solutions are going to be key to keeping this number here below 1.5 degrees. Now, this shows the level of human-induced global warming since the Industrial Revolution. And as you can see, it's ticking up the whole time. Global warming of more than 1.5 degrees Celsius could potentially expose the world to more extreme weather, greater economic losses, lower crop yields, higher sea levels and greater damage to wildlife and to habitats. In order to limit that warming, countries need to take immediate action, radically changing the way energy is produced, used and transported. That's the view of the International Energy Agency, which has set out more than 400 milestones the world's energy sector needs to meet if we're to stand any chance of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So they say that investments in new oil and gas projects need to stop immediately and no more coal-fired power plants can be built if emissions are to be cut to the level that many countries have committed to. The IEA recommends that by 2035, cars with internal combustion engines should no longer be on sale anywhere. And by 2040, the entire electricity sector should be net zero, powered entirely by renewable sources. Well, earlier I spoke to the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, and asked him to explain what needs to happen if the world is to reach that net zero target by 2050.
Number one, we have to make the most out of the existing clean energy options, such as solar, wind, electric cars, energy efficiency. We have to make the most out of them. This is number one. Number two, in parallel to that, we need some other technologies, clean energy technologies, which are under development, but not yet part of the market today, such as hydrogen, such as advanced battery technologies. We need them especially to decarbonize the sectors such as iron, steel, cement, aviation, trucks. We need this new technology. This is the second one. Third, we have to drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels, oil, gas and coal. Broadly, these three important categories need to be addressed, and the way doing this is through investments in clean energy technologies.
Is the UK wrong, in your view, not to have banned, then, new oil and gas exploration in the North Sea?
I mean, UK government is making exemplary steps, to be honest with you, when you look at what they do at home and what they do outside. And whether or not governments in UK, in US, Europe, China, Indonesia, if they still give licenses for the coal or oil or gas investments or exploration, this, in my view, poses two challenges. Number one, whether or not they contradict with their own domestic climate goals, is number one. And number two, as I said, we need to reduce the oil use, gas use, coal use drastically, and some of those oil production, gas production, coal production investments may well be wrong investments, and the governments or companies may well lose money as a result of such investments.
So that's what the International Energy Agency thinks governments should be doing. But what's the reality? Well, back in November, the UK government announced a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. The aim is to build back better from the coronavirus pandemic, support green jobs and accelerate progress towards reaching net zero. Well, joining me now from Westminster is the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. Hello to you. First of all, I want to get your reaction to what the IEA is saying. They're talking about how action is needed now if emissions targets are going to be reached. They say there should be no investment in new fossil fuel supply projects. So will you commit to a ban on new oil and gas exploration in the North Sea?
We're not going to commit to it because, as you know, there are 250,000 jobs. But what we are committed to is effecting a transition. And that's why I helped to negotiate a transition deal. And we published that transition deal. It's called the North Sea Transition Deal in February, and it was widely received, well received indeed. And Dr. Birol was quite right. I mean, he was good enough to say that the measures of the UK government are exemplary. That was the word he used, because other countries around the world are looking at our 10-point plan. They see the fact that we've taken coal off the electricity power system, and they think that we're taking steps in the right direction. Does that mean that we shouldn't increase our efforts? No, we have to increase our efforts. We have to do this better and faster. But I think we're going in the right direction, and it was very clear from Dr. Birol's words that he shares that view.
So 6 months since that 10-point plan, what concrete progress can you report?
So one of the things that I was very pleased to do was only a few weeks ago go up to Teesside, which was declared as a free port. And in Teesside, GE Renewables, who make wind turbines for offshore wind farms, they've announced a £142 million investment and something like 500 jobs that will be created directly from that. Only today they've announced the number of jobs that they think they can create from it. We've already committed to a fourth auction round for offshore wind. We have something like 35% of the global capacity, worldwide capacity in offshore wind is here in the UK, and that we want to build on that success. So there are lots of things that we're doing that I think will drive the global move to net zero.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you.
Thank you.
In today's other climate news, just 20 companies are responsible for producing more than half of the world's single-use plastic, according to the Plastic Waste Makers Index. The report lists ExxonMobil, Dow and Sinopec as some of the biggest sources of plastic food packaging and bottles. Despite the environmental impact of single-use plastic, production is set to grow by 30% in the next 5 years. Supercar brand Lamborghini will debut an electric model by 2030. The company also says it will invest £1 billion to electrify some of their existing models, with aims to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% by 2024. Chief Executive Stephen Winkleman says the change is necessary in a radically changing world. And Leonardo DiCaprio is donating more than £30 million to restore the Galapagos Islands. The actor has partnered with conservation charity REWILD to help endangered animals and protect the island's wildlife. They aim to reintroduce 13 locally extinct species, including the pink iguana and the Floriana giant tortoise. Arnold Schwarzenegger wants people to have a better understanding of what COP26 is all about. The Terminator star has been speaking to the summit's president, Alok Sharma, about this year's climate conference in Glasgow. It's part of a new monthly web series called Arnold's Stammtisch, in which Arnie talks to environmental leaders around the world.
So how do you feel about being the president of something when everything you've done up until now, everyone knew what it is, and now people say, I don't know really what it is?
Well, I think by the end of this year, so we're going to have this event in Glasgow, as you know, in November, and I very much hope by the end of this year, everyone does know what this is, because, this is about tackling climate change. And that is the biggest challenge, I feel, that is facing humanity right now.
And you can see more of Arnie's chat with Alok on our website. Just head to skynews.com/climate. Now, the government has announced plans to restore peatland, increase tree planting and set a legal target to stop the decline of nature and wildlife. It's all part of plans to tackle the climate crisis and help reach net zero emissions by 2050. Well, in a moment, we'll hear more about plans to treble tree planting in England. But first, let's look in more detail at those plans to ban the sale of peat compost by 2024. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, is here now. So, Thomas, tell us more about peat.
Well, peat is one of the unsung heroes of the climate story. It stores 3 times as much carbon as the same area of woodland. And that's because the plants that grow in these boggy areas don't fully decompose when they die. They just get buried in the waterlogged soil. Now, in the UK, we've got 12% of our land area covered by peat, and it stores 3 billion tonnes of carbon. And if it was in a healthy state, it could store another 3 million a year, sucking that carbon out of the atmosphere. The problem, though, that a lot of it is being drained or is damaged to make way for livestock, crops and conifer plantations. And that means that as the peat dries out, it's releasing 20 million tonnes a year of carbon back into the atmosphere. So instead of being a carbon sink, it's a carbon source. And the government's recognised that. The Environment Secretary today said that there will be a peat action plan. And as you say, peat compost will be banned in garden centres from 2024 in England. And it's also funding the restoration of 35,000 hectares of peat in the UK.
Thomas, thank you. Well, as well as the plans to ban peat, the government has also announced that 7,000 hectares of new woodland will be planted every year by 2024. And a new multi-million-pound fund will provide more incentives for landowners and farmers to plant and manage trees, as Becky Cottrell reports.
These young trees are set to become a vital part of this farm's ecosystem. Small willow saplings are being planted not in a wood, but in a vegetable field. This is agroforestry.
We all know that trees capture carbon, but they're also a massive tool for farmers. They can provide you extra crops above your vegetable crops, such as apples and pears and things like that, like we do here. But they can also, they provide wind protection for my crops.
These trees don't just capture emissions, they also attract songbirds that get rid of the insects that attack the crops, meaning there's no need for chemical pesticides. So planting here is efficient, sustainable, and it makes financial sense.
The government hopes giving out agroforestry grants will help to meet their planting targets.
About 20% of our countryside needs to be repurposed for climate uses. The great news about using trees and woodland to capture carbon is that they can also be landscape and nature friendly, support wildlife, support farming and be a beautiful part of our countryside.
Ministers, campaigners and many landowners say farms need to be used to reduce emissions. But growers like Andy worry food production will be driven abroad to meet planting targets at home, unless farmers are given the support he says they need to help us become carbon neutral. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Gloucestershire.
That's all for today. Coming up tomorrow, the Eden project in Cornwall starts drilling for hot rocks to generate geothermal energy. Thanks for watching. See you then.